encouraging students to lead activities, to lead the discussions, and really foster that ownership and that peer-to-peer influence.
A really great use of those asynchronous tools where you put those assignments in there and then people can chime in there as they feel that they have time throughout the week.
Welcome to Key Connections for Educators. I'm Nate Key.
And I'm Hannah Knecht.
I got my start in corporate training.
And I started out as a classroom teacher.
But the conversations between us, they've made us better educators.
And now we're inviting you into those conversations because learning out loud together changes everything.
So whether you teach students or you train professionals, we believe these conversations can connect us all.
Welcome back to Key Connections for Educators. We're so glad you're here. In our last episode, Nate and I dove into the powerful world of social learning, and we quickly realized there was way too much ground to cover in just one session. From personal stories and practical strategies we've used with our own learners, we had so many valuable insights to share that we decided to split the conversation into several parts. So today we're picking up right where we left off with the next part of maximizing social learning in classroom and virtual strategies. Whether you're working with students in a K-12 classroom, a college setting, or a corporate training environment, this episode is packed with tools you can use to make your learning space more engaging, interactive, and effective. We'll be diving deeper into 5 key pillars of social learning. They are structure, inclusion, feedback, technology, and facilitation. And we'll be showing how each one can transform both in-person and virtual learning experiences. Along the way, we'll share examples like peer teaching, think, pair, share activities, gamification, student-led projects, asynchronous tools, and more. So get ready to walk away with real-world strategies and inspiration to help your learners not just absorb information, but connect, collaborate, and grow together. Let's jump in.
Games lend themselves to real world scenarios. And that goes back to what you were talking about earlier with simulated real world scenarios. And so we might say that role play could actually be a part of a game where there's a challenge to overcome and there's stakes and there's risk. And that's the real world. That's as close as you get to the real world. So I love that about role plays.
I do too. Trying to align the game with the real world to enhance it.
Yeah. Now, there's something else we might be able to do asynchronously with role plays. And that is if we have a chance to record the role play itself, not only do you have that live person to person interaction that's social learning on its own, but even if I went to a system like the one I curate at work, which is more asynchronous, and I do a role play and it's recorded, I could then share that with other people. And so now I can learn from watching Hannah go through a simulation. Maybe she came up with some ways of interacting with that customer or working through that problem in a way that I hadn't known about. And in the best case scenario, maybe it's even a video. I could comment on the video in the line of where it is and say, wow, it was really great. I really liked the words you were using here. I want to do that. Or even in the opposite, right? So maybe my manager wants to come in and give me some coaching on that and say, hey, you said this and it worked, but if we just changed these few words around, I think it would be even more effective. So right in the line of that role play, I've got the ability to see that and get other people to actually talk about my experience. And that's sometimes uncomfortable, but I think with the right expectations that we're all in this together, we're trying to learn, we're trying to grow, and it's not a gotcha, but it's really a way for us to get better together. Those can be really effective.
Are there any particular applications or platforms that you recommend?
Yeah, I am a big fan of a platform called Allego. I do administer the Allego platform in my current job, so I really enjoy that one, specifically because of the fact that they have the ability to record those videos. And then, as I said before, like right in the line of that video itself, we have that playhead, you can actually put comments right there. So it makes it so simple to actually see where that interaction actually occurred. And it's really easy just to use. There's a lot of other ones that are out there. Seismic Learning has some things, all sorts of different video companies that are coming up there, and even YouTube
Right.
you could use, right? I mean, we put our stuff on YouTube, and hey, by the way, We ask for comments all the time, and we actually would like to see your feedback. So leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
That's right.
The way we could use technology either as a supplement, not necessarily instead of, but as a supplement to a classroom, is a fantastic thing.
I agree. Anything else on gamification and role playing?
There's probably a lot more, but we have so many other things that I think we could talk through that, maybe we jump into something like,
Learning stations.
yeah, I know about learning stations from the education world, but I don't know that I've ever really used them in the corporate world. So I'd love to hear more. Maybe we can come up with some ideas.
Yeah. So learning stations are setting up small group activities at stations and encouraging interaction and cooperative learning. So we ideally think about them like in the elementary setting. When I was working with my guided reading group, the students who weren't in that particular small group, they were visiting 2 or 3 stations around the classroom to work on their literacy development, vocabulary, and comprehension. And so, with stations, whether you are working with adults or with children, it's so important to keep the directions simple, especially if you, the facilitator, aren't necessarily overseeing or facilitating. You're giving some autonomy to the group and doing it on their own. So, keeping directions simple. Then, also, what's really helped is giving a demo of what's expected at the station, how much time you should spend there, going through any materials that are used and what those expectations are, guidelines. That's really helped in making the stations effective. In the virtual setting, I have done learning stations, but it's been more of a choice board or a menu so that groups had opportunity to choose which of 3 activities they wanted to do at the same time, and then we would rotate in doing that. But again, I feel like you could do that in the classroom, and then you could also do it as more of a homework assignment. I know when I was a operations trainer, I had 5 activities that I would pair students together, and so the partners needed to complete those 5 activities by the end of the month. And so they could choose when they wanted to put time on their calendars to tackle those activities together, but the expectation was to complete all 5 in a certain time frame together.
That makes a lot of sense. And so as you're saying that, I think I was thinking about reading groups. And that's as far back as when I was in elementary school, we'd have the reading groups and you'd go to a little table with some other folks and then you may move around the room and spelling words are over here and reading was over there. And maybe there was somebody working one-on-one. So that's a really tried and true method in education. But I like how you're bringing that even to the corporate world to say it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be synchronous.
That's right. Yes.
So I can do learning stations across the course of the next couple of days. It could be pre-work.
That's right. Yes. In fact, several of the activities were pre-work.
But let's say we were running a seminar, you and I, on good facilitation techniques, and we had people that were attending. We could give them a homework assignment to maybe meet up with 2 or 3 other individuals and practice a facilitated session. Or I don't know, I'm making this up. But I think that's the idea is that you've given them the autonomy to do that work when they want and with a group of people.
Yes. And speaking of autonomy, student led initiatives are an ideal way to bring in social learning. This is encouraging students to lead activities, to lead the discussions, to lead classroom responsibilities, and really foster that ownership and that peer to peer influence, which I think is just money. I've done this in regards to student led initiatives where they wanted to create a poster or a short slide presentation on a specific topic. And I would have them lead those directives. Could also be through partner simulations, partner teachbacks, and also readers theater. So some of the student led initiatives that I did, this is very creative when I was teaching 4th grade in math. We were learning about placeholders and the value in number sets. And I actually gave different ideas, and one student-led initiative turned into them creating a short skit, a short reader's theater about the different placeholders of the tens and the ones and the hundreds. And it was really creative out of the box, but it was student-led, and I would have never thought that up on my own.
That is amazing. The creativity that some folks unleash when they do that. I'll never forget the puppet show that I got, a sock puppet show at one point in time from a sales group. They put on a sock puppet show about overcoming objections. And the objection was that the one sock had too many holes in it. And it was so somebody had like a smelly old sock. But I'll never forget it, right?
Right.
And what's interesting is if you and I, as the facilitator, asked them to do something like that, we would probably be laughed out of the room. And yet, when the participants ask for it and are the ones engaged in it, it turns into something that's memorable and amazing and funny and really provocative. And so it's just, you got to balance those two out. I would say that in my experience using this asynchronous platform, Allego, the other thing that I've been able to do is sometimes people want to train other folks and because they're a subject matter expert. And what a great opportunity for me to then have them actually record something and they can share it out to a group. Or if somebody's asking for it, I can go find some subject matter experts and have them actually record some things and then share those. And that also frees me up to not have to know everything about everything and to have some variety. So if I'm sharing an idea and then I have a video from Hannah to back it up, it creates a little bit of that expert in the room, even if they're not in the room. And that's another thing you can do is reach out to some of those subject matter experts, get them just to record their own videos.
Going back to something you had said earlier, I want to call out how memorable student-led initiatives often are. And when a student takes ownership of their own learning, there is embedded retention and it being a memorable experience. That's really important for creating learning experiences, how to engage with our students in a memorable way so that they will retain the information.
Yeah. The assignment that my son has right now, and this is high school, they had to create their own country.
Oh, wow.
Right, so they're learning about civics, and they're learning about governments and organizations, so they had to create their own country, and they had to name it, and his name's Noah, and he had 2 names he came up with, which are really great. One was the Noah-peens.
Like the Philippines, but
That's
it's
right.
Philippines. I like that.
He's gonna remember the personalization that he was able to use, and again, that autonomy that he was able to use to create something fun and interesting, and if you and I assigned it, it would fall on deaf ears, and they'd be like, "Wow, that's lame," but they come up with it themselves, it's the best idea ever.
It really is. It really is. Yeah. All right. Do you want to move into some of these asynchronous and virtual learning experience ideas?
Yeah. When we think about replicating the in-person classroom experience, which is the ideal form of social learning, we still see in the virtual world examples of people learning socially. I think about YouTube comments. I think about sharing videos back and forth. TikTok is a great example of this because people are sharing something and then remixing it and sharing it back. And that's social learning in a way, right?
So,
There's all sorts of things that we can do in the virtual environment. Are there any that you have used or that you just really like?
when I was facilitating our leadership development program, using discussion boards and polls to get different students engaged with content and then commenting about their conclusions or their findings was huge. We did that by creating a specific Teams channel for our program, and then certain prompts or polls would then engage the students to respond in that way.
I took an online class a few years ago, and I think the instructor did a great job of setting that up because I've seen those things implode if they're done the wrong way, right? Everyone knows they have to go comment on the discussion board for a part of their grade, and so they wait till 5 minutes before the things ended, and there's really like not a discussion. They're just making comments on somebody because that's what you're required to do. And this instructor said, each day I need you to go on and actually respond to a prompt. And then the last 3 days before the class was due, that's when you need to go back and look at other people's.
Oh, wow. Good. Yeah.
And again, that's that structure that we're talking about. We know that that first part is for thoughtful reflection, and the second part is for you to go back and actually converse amongst yourselves and find things that resonate with you. That's what we need sometimes to know, like, how do I do this the right way? And by the end of the course, then everyone's just in there and actually having great debate and having some really good conversations. But you need to have that lead me to how to participate at first in order for me to actually get how it works.
Yeah, to set the expectations. Another idea that I utilized for this was we would have guest speakers come in for the leadership development course. And before the guest speaker would come, I would ask the students, what questions do you want asked of our guest speaker? And so then everyone would post what they wanted to learn as far as questions. And then we would vote on what would be the top 3 to 5 questions that we would ask the guest speaker based on what the students had provided in the chat. And that really provided the motivation. So it wasn't like, well, I have to put a question in. It was like, I want my question to win. I want the guest speaker to answer my question, and I want everyone to vote for it. And there was that sense of motivation there.
Yeah, and I think that really works well when you're in a group of people that are very motivated and really want to learn that content. If you have something that's a required course and you have to go through this, the ethics course that you have to go through it, I don't know that that's necessarily the place to do something like that, right? What do you want to hear from the compliance officer on, right? But
Mhm.
but when you're actually in a place where people want to learn how to be leaders, or maybe they do have some questions for compliance because there's a lot of things that are getting in the way of getting work done because compliance always has a problem with it. Hey, we're going to have a meeting with compliance. Can you put your questions in here for them so that when they arrive, we'll have all of those and they'll have prepared answers? That's terrific. So I think that motivation factor really helps to drive that.
Another thing that comes to mind is peer review of tools or assignments. So, again, I'm thinking about a complicated tool that we used. And I used the comments feature in Word document to ask the students as they were actually going through their scavenger hunt to use the comments to ask questions. And that ended up becoming a social learning dialogue where the students were interacting with one another on the actual pretend tool, and that fostered a really interesting conversation as well.
Yeah, I think that the collaborative tools that we have, so if you use the Microsoft suite or the Google suite or any of the competitors, now that they have the ability to, like, in real time, actually edit a document together
Yes.
and to be in there at the same time, and Hannah wants to make a change and I can see that change in real time and not just from watching her screen, but I'm in the document with her. I think that's really cool and really just something that is got some untapped potential. Anytime I can't get everybody together at the same time, but I need to brainstorm, or maybe Hannah and I are preparing for a lecture that we're delivering together, and we're going to be jumping back and forth. Hannah's going to have the first 5 minutes, and I'm going to have the next 5 minutes. And so we want to make sure that we sync up really well. Well, she could record her sections of it on her own, and I could watch those. And then I could record my sections on my own, and then she could watch those. And then we could get together and discuss them in person. Right. So you're cutting down that time that we have to do together because I can give my 5 minute speech without her there.
Exactly. Yes. That's a really creative way in order to maximize our time.
Yeah. So I think about that, especially with busy schedules. If you get people that are trying to get work done, but they can't necessarily find a time to meet, that's a really great use of those asynchronous tools where you can put those assignments in there, put an idea out there, brainstorm, and then people can chime in there as they feel that they have time throughout the week. That's a really important thing that we don't want to overlook. But structure is important. Make sure people are understanding when and how things are due so it doesn't all pile up at the last minute.
Yes, and that they understand the technology that they're using. If it is a specific tool, whether it's like a whiteboard or whether it's comments in a document, those kinds of things.
Yeah. When you're facilitating virtually, there's also some technology that we can use to try to create more of that in-person look and feel. Like Zoom is now such a great tool that we can use to replicate that classroom.
Yeah, that's really important. And in those specific settings, it's important that we put our cameras on when we are wanting to have more of those social interactions. So keep that in mind as well.
Actually, what's the right amount of people in a small group or in a large group where the cameras either make sense or don't make sense? Because I've been in some meetings where there's 400 people don't need to have their camera on at the same time.
Not needed. Yeah, exactly. I don't have a hard and fast rule. Depends on what's the purpose of the meeting.
Mm.
Because when I was leading the women's business resource group, I had 14 leaders and I wanted their cameras on because we were a whole group. We were all sharing our ideas for planning. But anything more than that, you're right. It seems like it's fine if the cameras are off.
Right. Yeah, you're only gonna on Teams at least, which is what I use at work, you're only gonna see 5 people anyway, right? So if everyone has their cameras on, it's just eating up the bandwidth. I feel like when I wanna get to know people,
Yes.
or if we're gonna have a small group discussion, that's a great time to put the cameras on. But otherwise, there's something nice about being able to turn them off. I think we get screen fatigue sometimes from having to feel like I have to show up on camera differently.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing virtual facilitation, saying, "Hey, when we're introducing everybody, I'd love to see your faces. So first 5 minutes, can you turn your camera on? And then I'm going to get started with a couple of instructions. At that point in time, I'm going to ask you to turn them off. And that way you can just really focus on the material and not have to worry about whether or not your hair's looking right or the kids are running off in the background or whatever."
So this leads to the idea of the importance of cohorts and smaller groups for social learning if you are in a larger setting. For the leadership development course, I had 50 participants, and in planning and structuring the program, it was so important that I broke the 50 into smaller groups of 8 to 10 participants for study groups or for cohort activities so that they could then do more of the social learning aspect of a group rather than trying to accomplish that in a huge whole group setting
Yeah, I think that's really smart. It's like you have a learning buddy.
or a
And
learning group, a study group,
yeah,
accountability group.
there's like 2 schools of thought on that process is the one would be assigning those in advance, and you as the facilitator are dictating where people go. That's has its value. The other could be letting people naturally find those connections on their own. Do you have any recommendations on when one is preferred over the other?
A lot of it has to do with the intrinsic motivation of the participants. So,
Mm.
for instance, with something that is you don't have the intrinsic motivation. I think that's where the facilitator going ahead and putting groups together and giving the expectation of, hey, this is what you're doing for 10 minutes with these 5 other people is really important. But I'm in another course right now that is completely self driven and self motivated. And we're in a large group of 200. And there's been a couple of us who have instant messaged one another and said, "Hey, can we get together after the session and create like a study group, an accountability group for camaraderie and to share suggestions?" And I think that because there's that intrinsic motivation, we all really want to show up on that smaller group call more for the application and processing of all the content that we're learning.
That's a really great point. I was co-leading a session a few years ago, and it was a smaller subset of our account management team. But even within that, there was a number of folks that actually would kind of bundled together, not at the command of the people facilitating it. They just wanted to get together and talk about these concepts and hold each other accountable and all those other things. It was a really cool thing to watch that naturally occur. But I think something that I've picked up on is just saying that that's an option for people, not mandating,
Yeah.
but saying, "Hey, there's another group right before your cohort that wanted to get together and do some smaller study groups just to really think about this, challenge each other, just share some ideas outside of the classroom." It's not mandatory, but if you want to make something like that occur on your own, those can be some really key relationships that you'll want to carry for the rest of your life. So I encourage you to find your people and letting people have that autonomy to go find it. But I think making that suggestion as a facilitator, not everyone's going to think about it.
Because some study groups I've been a part of, it was more forced and went through the program, did what I was assigned, never really bumped elbows with those people again. But I know for my leadership development course, some of those cohorts, one in particular from 2023, they still meet monthly today, and it's 2 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Giving people the choice between having a group or individual work. So there's this competition that occurs every year. You're probably familiar with it. National History Day. Have you heard about it? I'm sure you have. You're in the of course, you're in the education space. My son doesn't really like group work, so he likes to choose the independent. But there's a lot of people that would rather do a group project. And so those are two different competition tracks. It's the same assignment. You're going to write a group paper. You're going to do a group skit. You're going to do a group documentary. And yet you have the autonomy to choose, do I want to do it on my own? Do I want to do it with a group of other people? And so that really honors those that actually want that social learning experience, and also gives that person that really would prefer to do it all themselves the ability to do it all themselves. And by the way, they still probably get coaching from their teacher and maybe some parents or something else. So they're still getting some social learning. They're just not necessarily having to feel like they're a part of a group where they don't want to be a part of a group,
I love that. Yeah.
and giving people that choice. And I think that some people are going to end up going towards the group anyway.
Yeah.
And the individuals that don't, let's just make sure that we're honoring the fact that they're still going to potentially do a readout. They're going to do a teach back. So they're still going to get that social interaction. They're just not necessarily going to have to put the project together with other people.
I agree. It really does honor those who'd rather work independently.
I think a lot of these activities, as long as they have the right instructions, they're going to really work well. If you leave people to their own devices without any sort of information on how things work or examples of how they work, I think
Mhm.
that's when you end up having activities flop or not actually get the results you're looking for. So
Or if
that's
they're too complicated. That's been my experience. If an activity is at all too complicated, that's when I haven't had the best success with social learning activities.
yeah, which kind of goes into that idea of feedback.
Yeah.
Are we allowing our students not just to impact each other, but are they also being able to impact future learners?
Great point. Yes. In our continuous improvement of the class or the course or the module program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if we're using all of these key points, so structure, inclusion, feedback, technology, and of course, being the facilitator behind the scenes that's holding it together and making sure that there's some accountability, that we are trying to learn things, not just have a good time. That's a great way to set your classroom or your virtual learning experience into a more social learning experience.
Nate and I only covered some of the activities. We want to hear from you. What have been the social learning activities that have resonated with your students, whether you're in the K-12 classroom, whether you're in academia, or whether you are in a corporate training setting? How can you engage your learners through more social learning activities and bring that component to life?